Are you looking for information about matching triangle points? Or maybe you're interested in how to assemble a tree pattern. In this video, you'll find out how cutting, sewing, and pressing determine the accuracy of your block. You'll get tips in each of these areas to help with matching seams and triangle points while working on this block. Are you ready for the challenge? You'll find this supply list below, along with links to the other handouts. If you're new to this seasonal sampler series, directions for the 3 maple leaf blocks can also be found in the links below. In the previous video series, you learned how to make these triangle squares. Lay them out using your pattern as a reference. All the leaf triangles on this side point to the center. All the leaf triangles on this side point to the center. Arrange your triangles in a pleasing design. If you have extra triangles, save them for another project. Make sure to take a photo of your final design to use as a reference when sewing these sections together. Now this is a challenging project as you have lots of intersections and points to match. But if you break it down into manageable parts, it's not so bad. On this pressing chart, you can see the 3 sections. First, I'll sew each one of these rows together. If you decided to try the paper piecing, you'll have those rows already sewn together. You'll just need to remove the paper. I find it easiest to move my layout near my machine. I'll sew this row together first, put right sides together. I like to hold the section that I'm going to sew in my hand. I want to make sure that everything's lined up, not only this side lined up, but the top lined up and the bottom lined up. I'll start with a leader, which is just a piece of fabric folded. Double check to make sure everything's nice and straight. I don't like to use pins at this point, but if you feel more comfortable using them, then that's okay. Lead this up. For this project, sewing an accurate 1/4 inch seam is most important, as if you get off just a little, it'll affect the whole piece. So you might want to sew a scant 1/4 inch seam, as this helps with accuracy. The edge of my 1/4 inch foot is right here. If I move over just maybe a thread in this direction, that'll give me a scant 1/4 inch. Another scrap to sew off. When I open this up, you want at least a 1/4 inch between the point and the edge. A 1/4 inch between the point and the edge. Lay it back down the board. I'll put right sides together. Line up the edges, this edge and these sides, and stitch. Continue sewing in this manner until you have each one of the rows sewn together. After each row's been sewn together, refer to this diagram for pressing information. For example, these 2 seams in this row are pressed in this direction. After each row's been pressed, you'll start sewing these sections together. At this time, when I start matching points and intersections, I usually have to break out my pins or glue to keep everything in place. You'll be matching intersections and points for the 6 rows on the top and also for the 3 rows on the bottom. You'll put right sides together. Want to make sure that this is lined up down here. So I'll put a pin there. Pull this back to look at this intersection. Because the seams were pressed in opposite directions, they should nudge up against each other. Put a pin there. Pin this edge. I want to make sure everything's lined up, and pin. Let's look at this intersection. You have a point here and a point there. To help match those points, I'll put a pin through this point, and then I'll stick this point, sort of line them up like that, and pin. Take this out and pin. I'll take this over to the sewing machine and sew that 1/4 inch seam. When I get here, instead of crossing right through this intersection, sometimes it works best if I sew about a thread over from that intersection. Everything's been sewn together. Let's open it up, and I'll see that intersection looks good. those points are matching. Put this back on the board, put right sides together. I've lined up the edges, and this time, instead of pinning these intersections, some folks prefer glue. This is a washable glue stick, so I put a little dab of glue on each side, and I hold on to that a little bit till it dries to hold that in place. I'll do the same thing with this intersection, but instead of using a pin to match up those points, I'll just pull this back and sort of eyeball where those two meet. Take this over to sew, and when I open that, my points match. Continue sewing the rest of the rows in this section and then these 3 rows together. Make sure to match each intersection. Use pins or glue, whichever works best for you. Take your time and be patient, as sewing these sections can be a little tricky. Next, you'll get a heads up about some of the problems you might encounter, along with ideas for fixing them. Some fixes are easy, but others will require seam ripper. Here are a few tips that might help. If you look at this little section, these points are matching, but this point right here is a little off. It's not because of my sewing and cutting, it's because of my pressing. If I pull this back a little and repress, you'll see that those points are dead on. When you square up your half-square triangles, make sure that that diagonal goes right through the center. I've put this 2.5-inch square on this diagonal line. In this 2.5-inch square, the diagonal is not lined up. When you sew this square to another square, the point will be about 1/4 of an inch down. When you sew a diagonal that's not in line, will result in a point that's either too close to the edge or too far away from the edge. Ripping out the seams on the red triangle won't help, because the only way to fix this is to start over with a new square. So make sure those diagonals are lined up. If there's space between triangle points, you can usually fix this and not have to rip out any seams. If I sew a thread in this direction, those points should match up. I've sewn this a thread or 2 over, and when I open that, my points match. Here's an intersection that can't be fixed by pressing or sewing a thread over. Both the points and intersections don't match. In order to get these 2 intersections matching, I'll have to rip out this seam and re-sew. When each of your sections have been completed, follow the pressing guide. The seams in this section will be pressed to the left. The seams in this section will be pressed to the right. Put right sides together and sew. Press, put right sides together, make sure to match your seams, and sew. At this point, your block should measure 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. In the next video, you'll learn a different technique for setting this block on point. You'll also find out how to add these maple leaves. Hope you stay tuned. Thanks for visiting LearnHowToQuilt.com. Please share our free videos and patterns with your friends. Thanks.